Molo Sanbonani, hello, how's it? Welcome to another episode of the Big Daddy Liberty Show, the Blacks Only edition. That's right, this show is called Blacks Only. Why Blacks Only, Big Daddy Liberty? Well, I call it Blacks Only because I'm taking the mickey, I'm making fun of society's obsession with race, things like identity, the very things that are actually really quite meaningless, because I'm arguing that even if you have a studio full of black individuals or white individuals who are actually different intellectually, that is the only diversity that really matters. I know a lot of you mainstream media officials are now looking at this video or watching my content. Welcome to it. There was a very special welcome to a certain editor of a News 24. I'm sorry, did I mention particular publications? Guys, for those of you who are regular to the show, welcome to it. This is another week of the show. We have one singular issue that we're going to be devoting our time to in this episode, and that's the budget speech of 2020. Last week on Wednesday, the finance minister spoke. Let's say again, I'll break it up in the good, the bad, and the ugly. So we're going to have that conversation today. But remember, before we get into any of this conversation, please like, share, and comment on any of my material, whether you're watching it on Facebook or YouTube. And if you're on YouTube, make sure you hit that subscribe button and hit the bell notification so you can be notified every time I post. Guys, remember, share the show as widely as possible. I can only grow this channel with your help, and sharing it is the most, the best way to essentially get this voice and this show out into more spaces. Guys, there is a new name change to the show, not reflected yet in my graphics behind, but my shows are now called the Big Daddy Liberty Show, with the various iterations such as Blacks Only, the podcast, which is one show, and of course the flagship show itself every Wednesday, the Big Daddy Liberty Show. So small changes, but the same content, and we're going to be syndicating the show onto many more community radio stations across this country. So I'm already on Chai FM every Friday at 9 a.m. So make sure you tune in to 101.9 FM if you're in Johannesburg. And soon, for those of you who are in Durban and Nelspruit, PE, and Cape Town, I'll be on some of your favorite local community stations over there. So watch out for that information as and when we begin to roll out the show. Guys, jam-packed show. I'm going to introduce my guest in studio, Mr. Sinethemba Zonke. He is an independent researcher for now, although he does work for an institution. But he's someone who is, I can call him a liberal because, he's one of those Josie liberals. I often talk about Cape Town liberals, but he's one of those Josie liberals. So I'm very happy to have him in studio. Brother, welcome to the studio. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, Sisha. Thank you.
Excellent. Let's hop straight into it. Interesting week last week. The minister comes up, uses that aloe metaphor that he likes using, but it just felt, I don't know, it just felt like the country's become a lot more aware of just how much danger we're in fiscally, just how much danger we're in economically, that this speech had to matter, didn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as they always say about the budget speech, these are the real state of the nation.
Yes.
As much as we get the bombastic and the pomp of the sauna, the real meat is here in the budget speech. And we were expecting something big here. But I think what we actually got a bit of a sigh because of how low the expectations were.
This speech is one of the shortest in terms of the word count of the speech. I mean, Malusi Gigaba used something around 7,000 words. Pravin Gordhan, at the height of his tenure as the finance minister, something along the lines of 8,000 words. Last week, Wednesday's speech, 5,000 words. Hey, man, it's tough times, isn't it? He has to get straight to the point. But as I said, I'm going to break the speech down via the good, the bad, and the ugly. Let's look at the good. I mean, we always do this, guys. Surely there is some good, no matter what our personal views are towards the ANC government and the like. But the good, of course, must be at a face value. Yeah. If a minister says to you, hey, look, we're not going to raise taxes, we're going to stay at the same levels. When we talk about taxes, I mean personal income taxes, those direct taxes that are levied on people. The minister says, hey, we're not going to change these. It's going to remain the same. We're actually going to adjust them also to reflect the current level of them. There's massive applause in the House. Was that justified? Is that a good thing?
Yeah, I think, considering what the expectations are, considering the deficit and the lack of money the state has, that was a good thing. I think that what we were really expecting was that they would start cutting into the personal taxes, and then that has brought a relief. The fact that he firstly didn't raise them and that he just made those adjustments will have some tiny amount of relief for certain people in certain brackets.
Look, another good thing someone might say is, he raises the threshold for the exemption on transfer duty. So it used to be about 900,000 Rand plus minus. So maybe someone like you and I, the younger chap who wants to buy that first flat, we benefited from that. And by the looks of it, he's raised that threshold a little bit more to 1 million Rand. Is that a good thing also?
Again, that's a good thing. I think in a country where we need to see a lot more people owning property, I think it is a good thing. It is hopefully, in the future that they go better in terms of their trend. Again, in terms of what we are seeing as a nation, it's one of the good parts.
Of course, economically, owning property is actually quite important because when you own something like property, whether it's a flat, a farm, a house, whatever the case may be, it's a very smart way for the individual in a functioning economy, of course, to be able to do what's called household savings in economics. The idea that when you earn an income and you've dispensed your expenses rather, any money that you have left behind, you might stash in the bank, whatever the case may be. But most people will also use to improve their houses. Those of us who live in townships have seen this in real terms. You're around 3, 4, 5 years old, and you might live in a 1-bedroom house or a 1-bedroom shack. As long as you own the property and you can say this is ours, over time you can actually add to it and build what's now some of these palaces you'll find even in Lokshini. The importance of ownership.
I think that's actually a very great point, and I think I like the way you describe what has happened in townships, and I think a lot of us can see that experience over the 25 years, whether it's relatives or ourselves, where we've seen these properties growing. And the thing about property that you own is that it's kind of like a forced saving, because you're putting that money in there. Firstly, by if you're going to be paying your bond or anything like that, as well as you say, in terms of improving that, it forces you to save and it forces you to increase the asset that you hold, that is the property, and that's the house.
And you know what, like a lot of people, we don't talk about this quite a lot, especially when we then have this conversation in the context of EWC, that for a lot of people, wealth for them is actually locked in their house. Therefore, the idea of that person having to own that and have what we call property rights in liberal terms is super important. When you threaten property rights in a society, it isn't just the so-called targeted people, in this case farmers, who are going to be at disadvantage. It's even that township individual we're talking about who might now say, is it really worth me investing in this house if politicians, and really whether local government or national, will be empowered with the ability to take this property from me without compensating me? Is this not why we rail against something like EWC?
Definitely it is. I think the challenge is that it seems it's not to be getting through to a lot of people. And a lot of people see themselves as people who currently don't own property, but they don't see that what this does, as the way it is being proposed, is that basically it guarantees you that you will never basically own property if the way it is. You'll just basically be a ward of the state.
Exactly.
What has been the challenge over the past 25 years is not the constitution, it's not the laws, it's how they've been applied, how policy has been applied, and it's not been allowing those people who don't have property to actually get those opportunities to be able to buy property. I think that's what should be done, instead of like tinkering around with the constitution.
Absolutely. We had to bring that up because, you can't talk about this budget without talking about some of the policy proposals that have been put forward that are absolutely threats to this. So, unfortunately, that was, for me, perhaps the be-all, end-all of what was good. The bad then kicks in, and boy, does it kick in. South African politicians, Sne, are clearly drunk on the power of being in government, number one, and the lure of being able to spend money almost unchecked.
Yeah.
How do we see this? Well, we see this in the difference between what government collects via the South African Revenue Service, SARS, the tax man, and what they then spend. And that gap is what we call the deficit.
Yeah.
Snare, the deficit is at 6.8%. That's 300 billion rand.
Yeah.
Is that sustainable? Can we continue borrowing money essentially for expenditure like this and putting ourselves into debt?
No, we definitely cannot. And I think one of the things some people might argue, there's a lot of people argue that there will be that debate between the Keynesians and the Friedmans, the Milton Friedmans, where states should be spending. But the problem is that we've got an irresponsible state. So there's no point in borrowing when you're spending irresponsibly. You're not investing that in, we can see that where we're spending in education and health, that is not, it's not valuable. We're not getting the bang for our buck. So this is not sustainable considering that we're continuing to spend, we continue to borrow, but we're not seeing the fruits of this while we're getting the blowback in terms of increased interest repayment.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to even disturb your train of thought, because I wanted to add to that to support your view, which is it's this idea that it seems like we're borrowing money for consumption as the state and not necessarily for investment.
Yeah.
Whether you believe the state should be investing on behalf of people or not. I mean, that's more of an ideological thing. And Snare's right to bring up the sort of Keynesian versus a Friedman type approach. But let me put something to you. The ratings agencies. Remember that there's a lot of talk before the speech. Oh, what will the ratings agencies say? And then predictably, the usual gaggle of economists and analysts that we see on mainstream media were saying, oh, this is a wonderful speech. It should allay the fears or buy us time with the ratings agencies. But that wasn't the case. Almost immediately, Fitch was the first to say, hey, man, we're raising alarm bells. Remember, Fitch has already downgraded us to junk. And they're saying we're seeing alarm bells here at the continued insistence by government that they're going to spend to the hilt and there'll be no cutbacks essentially for the state. And unfortunately, Moody's also signaled a similar approach to say, look, we're not hearing much on the growth element. Yeah. We're hearing a lot, though, about the spending, and that's going to be a warning bell. Are we in trouble, Sneh?
No, we're definitely in trouble. I think that's the key thing. Again, it comes back to the way this speech was received, is that it basically, the bar is so low that all Tito did was just go over that very low bar. Mm-hmm. That's what the first reaction we saw from people were kind of joy. But as it set in, as we started reading it and seeing that there really isn't much of a change. We're not seeing a lot of details in terms of even the positives. The other positives, probably the public sector wage cuts. But we don't know. We've seen the track record of the state and the unions on that. And as you say, the spending that is still there in terms of the budget, as well as no much plans in terms of how to not simply just grow the economy. I mean, to grow this economy, there needs to be some drastic change. That budget is not showing us that the ANC government has really shown itself that now we know we need to change. We need to completely
wants to go into reforms.
Exactly. We need to reform the way that we are running government, we are running this economy. That budget, it did not, unfortunately, really give us that.
And that's my concern. When I listened to the speech, I actually broke it down into almost that Shakespearean concept. You know, all of Shakespeare's work, generally speaking, you can break it between two things. You know, the idea of appearances versus reality. You know, if you look at Macbeth, for example, I'm not going into detail here. When Lady Macbeth speaks about, Macbeth being the serpent beneath the flower. It's an idea that there's this flower that's the appearance, but there's a serpent beneath. And the speech, you can almost break into that same segment where the appearance is fantastic. This is a minister who's coming out saying, look, tough times, we're not going to move on tax. We're going to be lenient on this. We're going to be this on that. But the South African who's conscious, who knows the reality, almost immediately knows, okay, because you brought it up, on the issue of the public wage bill, firstly, the number of public employees we have, a bloated government. Secondly, the remuneration we provide to them, including in SOEs. You need a minister now who's literally going to have the same fight and a president who backs him, who's going to have the same fight that Margaret Thatcher had when she came into power. Yeah. When she came into power, there's a big union boss named Arthur Scargill. He was the boss of the National Union of Mine Workers. Yeah. Funny, that little correlation. Yeah. A lot of those lefties, by the way, came here. I mean, Patrick Raven from Kosatu, they came from England. Anyway, I digress. But she set herself up to literally take the unions on, because the unions were very powerful. They were the sort of people who would march into number 10 Downing Street and tell the Prime Minister what he can and can't do. Yeah. Margaret Thatcher said, I'm not having none of this. And she set herself up for a big fight with them, which she eventually won. Do you think we have a political will in this country, a president in Ramaphosa, a finance minister in Tito Mboweni, who are going to have that fight with Kosatu? Yeah. Kosatu, by the way, who's really come out and said, this means war.
And it's ridiculous considering, firstly, the reaction of Kosatu. Tito did not go far enough.
He really didn't.
And the cut is actually a cut on wage increases, which have been going up ridiculously for years. So it is quite, I think, a slap in the face, I would say, for South Africans who have been sucked to the teats by the public sector unions. But yeah, for Tito, it doesn't matter how tough Tito can be, as long as he has a president who's not willing to back him and a cabinet who's not willing to back him. That's what we have. I mean, we've seen with if we see how our former finance minister Pravin Gordhan, his reaction towards the SOEs as Minister of Public Enterprises, where he has been resolute that there won't be any cuts in institutions such as Eskom. So Tito has no backing. I mean, we know Tito can be back and forth or left and right with some of these things, and sometimes he does really say some interesting things in terms of when he spoke about let's sell SAA and things like that.
I mean, he put out a whole paper on this, which a lot of people, especially those who are the engine makers in the society, were saying, please, we need this.
Yeah, and that paper has no backing. Again, it's one of my disappointments this year from the SONA. From this budget speech is some of those key things in that paper are not being realized. As much as the president spoke to supporting some of what was said, but we're not really seeing it. And the reality, and it comes back to what you were saying about Margaret Thatcher and other leaders in the world. And this is something that is not being learned in South Africa. You need to be able to take tough decisions that are not going to please a lot of people,
including your friends.
Yeah. And that the ANC. And that's the sad thing. The ANC does not seem to learn that lesson. The problem is that even now, when they've tried to please everyone, they're not pleasing everyone. Kosatu is coming after them. We're going to have a very tough year, and it seems it's going to get worse. I saw the GDP projections by Tito. I mean, those were dire. Like at 0.3% for this year. We probably, considering what might happen with the unions, what might happen, we don't know, with Eskom, it probably might go even lower. We might definitely see a recession this year. I would probably say, because there's a lot of things that are going to come out of the woodworks.
I'd agree. I mean, look, and maybe as we really head towards the last 5 minutes of our chat, because I want to ask you at the end, or towards the end rather, what your top 3 reforms should have been in the speech. But before that question, just 2 more areas that I want to look at. Talk to me about the psychology maybe of an individual who listened to that speech, an ordinary guy on the street, from that poor chap who lives on a shack on a sand dune in Cape Town to the guy who pulls a recyclable bin in the streets of Johannesburg, to the lady perhaps who drives a Mercedes Benz and puts makeup on, in her German sedan. Talk to me about that South African listening to the speech. Are they confident that at the end of this year, listening to this budget, that this budget prioritizes the individual and families? Or is it more of the same, where a lot of government spending is very good for the politicians and their cronies and their elites? Who won at the end of the speech?
Yeah, I mean, I would say for South Africans in the past decade, they probably feel it's more of the same. Yeah. Right? And again, it comes back to not everyone will sit down and read the speech and actually try and analyze what this means. And they probably wait for certain experts or certain people reactions in certain sectors. But I don't think that speech really spoke to the common person on the ground. Yes, it does what you said, in terms of appearances. As usual, the government has done. You know, those appearances that we're spending a lot on education, we're spending a lot on health. But we know what that means at the end of the day. When that amount of money goes to those departments, there's no reforms. It's not really managed well.
And these feeders, these tenderpreneurs and these corrupt elites.
Yeah.
So when they say we spend this money, you know that some of it just sinks into that black hole, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So that's the thing. Like for the ordinary person, it doesn't. You get a lot of this. I mean, even with the sin taxes, probably. Yeah. I mean, people might. Again,
I'll put a graphic of those sin taxes.
Might be a debate in terms of, but where is it going to go? Where is all this money going to go? Is it going to be productively used? Another one that is bad, I think, that a lot of people don't see, is the fuel levy, which is increasing again, because that has an impact on other things. It's going to have an impact on food prices, and food prices have already been increasing.
That's right.
That's going to hit that person, as you mentioned, the person in the township, the person in the informal settlement, the person in the suburbs. That's where we're going to really start seeing ourselves struggle. As much as we've had some reprieve with no VAT taxes or personal income taxes, that fuel levy is going to increase. Again, I don't want to, we know how that that fuel levy has been used by the road accident fund. Again, we know it's not being used properly. It's going to be interesting. I think South Africans are at the end of their tether. We are at the end of our tether now because of what has not been done and could have been done years ago, a decade ago. The government is at a point where it has to pull back in terms of some funding. As we're seeing, it has to pull back in terms of Eskom, electricity, but it has promised people so much that they're no longer willing to be able to allow what government wants, and they're also struggling in other ends.
Sne, before we end it off, the top 3 reforms in your mind that should have been announced on that evening, but weren't. In the last, I'll give you a minute.
Yeah, I think for me, and with Tito has it in him and he's spoken about it, is on SOEs.
Yeah.
We need a proper reform on SOEs, on cutting SOEs and reforming the management of SOEs. The South African government needs to have a completely different form of thinking about SOEs. This is not a complete idea of privatization, but it's definitely, we need to stop thinking about this thing that these SOEs are completely required to be in the hands of people who have shown for years that they can't manage themselves. I think for me, that's one. Again, I mean, it goes back to as a show of faith, comes back to those who are our leaders, their cabinet. That cabinet should be cut. It's just too
bloated. I agree.
Bloated.
Absolutely.
It's too bloated. We've got deputy ministers who we don't know, who don't do much, who are basically doing a lot. So we know, and that probably comes to whether it's not just cabinet, but also the legislature. These people are the elites of government. They need to suffer as much as their workers. There's a small group of workers who are going to suffer in the public sector. And I would say the third leg, again, is probably how do we get companies, small businesses, big businesses to invest and grow. We again, it's more talk rather than concrete ideas and plans that this is what we're going to do as the government to ensure that your investments are protected, to ensure that you're going to get an environment that's going to allow you to grow in this country. South Africa, we've got so much potential. It's completely wasted. We're not seeing that. And I think those could have been a good reform area. I liked what was in the strategy paper last year, and maybe that's what we could have seen in that in terms of investment, in terms of actually really boosting and attracting that investment in this economy.
Sne, I fully agree with you. I think you're raising some important points. On that last point about small to medium-sized enterprise, I posted a tweet, I think last week, and I said, in real terms, why would you want to open a business in South Africa? What is the pull factor towards that when you have load shedding, high taxes, corruption, a high crime rate? Like, what is the value offering we're making to small businesses? Anyway, let me leave you with that thought. And but before we say goodbye, how do the folks reach you on your social media?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter. It's at SS Zonke. Other handles, if you could look at Prometheus Unbound on there, you'll find me on Twitter. I tweet a lot of interesting things.
Perfect. Brother, Thank you very much. And thank you for watching this episode of Blacks Only. I really just wanted to focus on the budget speech. Again, not necessarily going into the meat and potatoes of it. I think there's been lots of summaries of that speech, but really looking at the political significance of the speech in terms of what informed it, and of course what's coming out of it, and of course their reaction to it, as we've seen Abo Kosato and friends gnashing their teeth and declaring war on the finance minister. Hey man, we have to see how that plays out, and we're going to be watching that, of course, and maybe even commenting on it in next week's show. But I really wanted to have this conversation this week. Guys, remember, follow us on all our social media accounts. That is at the BDL Show. I've changed that to reflect the Big Daddy Liberty Show. And of course, you can follow me, your favorite fat boy. Come on now, at Big Daddy Liberty on Twitter. And of course, on Facebook, you'll find the same thing, Big Daddy Liberty and the Big Daddy Liberty Show. You'll also find us on Instagram. Hey man, we're now Instagramming, looking good up in that Instagram. You'll find us there too. And of course, on YouTube. Guys, thank you so much for watching this episode. Remember, if you want to support the work that I do, how about you throw a few rands my way? 90 Rand a month will do it in becoming a friend of the IRR. This is a crowdfunding campaign that we have, and those funds are exactly what we use to run this show and the various other shows that we have. How do you do that, you're wondering? Well, SMS your name to 32823. One of the consultants will give you a call and sign you up. An SMS will cost you 1 Rand. Terms and conditions apply. But hey, if you're part of that fourth industrial revolution that politicians always talk about and you're tech savvy, well then find us online at irr.org.za/join. And you can sign up for a monthly contribution of 90 Rand there. Guys, remember, the show comes out every Monday, so look out for that. Blacks Only on Mondays, the Big Daddy Liberty Show every Wednesday, and of course my podcast on a Friday. Thank you so much for watching, and leave a comment, like, share, and subscribe to the show. And remember, never trust a commie.